Hello, everybody out there in cyberspace, and good morning, and good afternoon, and good evening, and good night, and whatever time you're choosing to watch this. I thank you very much for joining us today at the Northwest Montana Historical Society's 19th annual John White Speaker Series. This one, of course, is a little bit different than in the past. Normally, of course, people come here to the museum on Sundays during the winter, and when we kind of have a big program and we have some cookies together and some coffee and we talk about what we learned. We're still going to do that, just we're going to do it in our own homes, or feel free to email me or on our Facebook page or anything like that. We're happy to always get this conversation started. And we're gonna have a heck of a conversation here today too. This is actually, I don't know, of course, what order anybody has chosen to watch these 4 John White series programs this year. This is the last one that we are recording, and so I'm happy kind of to go out on such a high note. Today, I am joined here over Zoom by Seth Bloom, who is an actor and a producer and a screenwriter, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And we're also joined by Brit, the director of the Conrad Mansion, who's going to kind of fill in some of these the gaps in Kalispell history for us. And of course, the John White series, named after John White, who, father and son, actually both custodians here in the Kalispell school system, which we might touch on a little bit today in our conversation as well. But for now, of course, I'll just turn it over to them for some brief introductions, and then we'll get going. Seth, why don't you go first?
Hi, I'm Seth Bloom. Currently, I'm working on a project for TV. And it is based on, to some degree, the history of the Conrad family as told through initially this book. But I will say it's morphed more into kind of the story of early Kalispell, and I'd say even more than that, a look at the progressive era, and it kind of becomes a little bit of America in miniature. It's a perfect setting for a grand drama, but yeah, so it kind of involves the whole town at this point. But yeah, that's what I've been working on, and that's what brings me here to speak with you all today.
Brit, you want to go?
Hi, sorry, I'm not alone here, so I'm going to be constantly unmuting myself, but yeah, my name is Brit. I am the director here at the Conrad Mansion. I started here about, 9 years ago as a tour guide, and I fell in love with it. So I came back to the mansion every summer during my college years to work as a tour guide, and then I've been the director for about 2-3 years now. So yeah, I love Kalispell history. I love any type of history, really, but you know, I love walking into the mansion every single day, and you learn something new every day. And yeah, I'm really excited that we get to sit down and just talk about Kalispell history, Conrad history. So it's going to be pretty fun.
So half interest in the silver dollar has already kind of been brought up. And Britt, I understand that's a pretty big seller for you guys over at the mansion. So Seth, how did you, from our conversation, you and I together, I understand, like, Kalispell, the amount of stories that this tiny little city contains is huge. How did you personally get connected to Kalispell? Was it when you picked up a copy of Half Interest and you just thought, wow, this Conrad fella, he and his family, this is the making of the American West?
Yeah, I mean, that's a piece of it. I'd say that, you know, my family moved to Montana when I was quite young, and I moved there and back a couple times. But in any event, when the Mansion Museum opened, and this kind of gives away how old I am, I was a little kid. I might have been about 5 or 6, and you know, summer times in the Flathead Valley are just magical. People fall in love with it left and right. You know, Flathead Lake and being there. In any event, we went to I think the museum maybe in its first year or two. I mean, and as a little kid, I was fascinated by it. just like, wow, this is the coolest place. Look at all of it. I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And so the Conrad Mansion, the story of these people, Kalispell in general, sort of became imprinted as part of, you know, how I saw the world was, you know, that was a piece of it. So, but later on, I came back as an adult, having already worked in film and TV and as an actor and worked in publishing, had written some scripts and whatnot already. And yes, saw the book on the shelf, took the tour, and was just like, you know what? This could work, you know, and I just had this flash of, you know, and that was around 2009 or 10. It was actually at the beginning of the financial crisis. So also had a lot of time to read books. But that was my first inclination when I sat down with the book.
That's awesome. And Brit, from your perspective there at the mansion, it helps to tell the story of early Kalispell, but not just from the Conrad family and you know, Conrad and his wife and his children, but there are a whole bunch of other people, you know, from various walks of life and in various you know, socioeconomic classes, so to speak, you know, that contributed not only to the town but to the mansion itself, correct?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the Conrads are just one piece of this really intricate puzzle, but the entire Western United States was settled by so many different groups. I think half interest touches on it in a bit. They had a servant problem here. They didn't know who to hire, and they did hire Japanese servants. So a lot of people don't realize many of the early settlers in the Flathead Valley were Japanese men who came over. You know, it's kind of hard to tell in our modern lens. Were they coming over for more opportunities? Did they ultimately get those? And maybe in your research, Seth, you've kind of looked into that a bit more. But yeah, there's so many different viewpoints and so many different backstories. And I think that as the years go on, those are the stories people want to hear more about, rather than the traditional Conrad history and the traditional stories that we hear.
You know, that's you know, that's great segue, because my initial pass in the book, which, you know, I got the proper authorization and obtained an option, which is something when, you know, you're serious about intellectual property, you do, and I still maintain that, because it to date is the only written account in longhand of the Conrads, and they are central to, I think, this history. And then now I'm going to talk through a television show, because they are exciting. They were rich, they were good looking, they were dynamic, they had this fantastic mansion. They were also very interesting. They were very charismatic, they had big egos, fashionable, intelligent, great taste, and, you know, were aficionados of art and culture, and in addition to being kind of tough people that lived on the frontier and could ride horses and shoot guns, and, you know, I mean, they're eminently fascinating people. And spending time with them seems natural. And a lot of television shows, you know, from Dynasty to Succession to, you know, name a show, you know, hanging around with rich people that have resources, a lot of fun. and anchoring the story around them is a lot of fun. But to wit, what Brit says is true. I did my first couple of drafts and it felt a bit empty. And that was this past spring. And I was, you know, about halfway done. I mean, I'd rather with my first draft. I was halfway done with my first draft. And I was like, yeah, it's just, I need to know more about the town. I want to know more about the servants. And I gotta, like, where did they go? And where did they eat lunch? And, you know, so on and so forth. And that led into some really marvelous avenues of discovery, including more about said Japanese servants, little tidbits here and there and this and that and the other thing, which I am incorporating into the show. The show, the way it's structured, is kind of like, it basically is half on the Conrads, and they are sort of, you know, the royalty, the center of the universe. If it were King Lear, Conrad would be King Lear.
Right. So that's pretty interesting, Seth. So you mentioned all these different avenues that you had to go on to kind of flesh it out a little bit, grow the initial idea from one family to an entire town, including, people that didn't necessarily work with the Conrads, but people that nevertheless were important to early Kalispell. So how, just, a couple, let's say I'm sitting down and I want to write a screenplay. Where do I go? What kind of avenues did you travel down to find this information?
Well, I mean, as with anything creative, and certainly when you're doing research, you don't know what you're going to find until you find it.
Right.
And I'll say this. So, because I am focusing on the Conrads, and I'm trying to envision a show. I chose 1900 specifically because it's 2 years before Charles dies. Like, we're going to get, in my version of the show, I don't mind giving a sneak peek. We come in right when he's at the zenith of his power, his looks, his family, and, he dies. It's sad. It's tragic. It's dramatic. And, this book is written really in the point of view of Alicia, his daughter. And we pay homage to that in the show because she has a fantasy view of her childhood, which is, listen, she had a horse and a stable. I mean, it was a magical place. The Conrad mansion, the grounds, the stables, the orchards, the parties that they threw, Christmas time, the tree, riding around in sleighs. I mean, it was a real, it's hard to find another account of a family living right in this period that's quite as wondrous. So point of view wise, we do pay homage to her. And as far as the other stories, how do they develop? I mean, obviously the servants, you start there if you're dealing with the Conrads, and it's difficult because you can't find a lot of personal accounts. I don't have a diary from a servant from that period.
Right.
I'm having to do research in books. I'm reading dissertations. I'm reading articles. I'm digging through census records and newspaper articles and opinion pieces and catalogs. I mean, you name it, to try to look at who these people might have been. And I'd say the Kalispell Bee, which is you can access through, I think, the one of the historical societies, and then also through one of like a .gov type website. That's been enormously helpful in fitting out who was around the Conrads and what the town was really like. And I would say. I mean, I could throw a dart on any place in town and tell you a little story. So, I'll stop right there and, let you expand on your point.
And that's kind of, that in itself is a cool thing, in going to find all of these, not necessarily side characters, but definitely supporting characters of the story. It's hard to, and Seth, you can speak to this a little in a second too, separate the character from the person, because of course they were people with their own lives and everything like that.
Yeah.
How would you determine then who gets written into the show as a more or less a character, and then who is just a the actual living person? Where do you draw the line? Where's that line drawn, or is it drawn at all?
This is a really unique case, because if you look at something like, I don't know, The Crown, I must admit, great show. I've seen a bit of it. I'm not deep into it just because I don't have the attention span because I'm working on all this. But, so historical characters, very famous. There's a number of facts that are known about it. Very recently, in the trades, and I think even in the national press, it was sort of like a whole thing about the monarchy and even the government maybe wanting that program to put a disclaimer saying, this isn't real. And, so there's some argument between the filmmakers and them about, is that really necessary? Don't you think people quite understand that you couldn't literally know So that it's a very interesting argument. So like the Conrads and, certain people in government at the time, their contemporaries, the dailies, the railroad people, they're historical figures. So you can write, I think you can posit them in semi-factual, inspired by events pieces, and even take liberties.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get to people that are not quite famous, and now you're talking about, perhaps folks that have living relatives in a certain, like in the county and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, like everybody else in early Kalispell.
The further you get away from someone who's super famous, the more you kind of go, wow, I only know a couple of things about this person. So what I would say to that is there's probably that I've written a number of characters in this show that at the moment they may retain real names of people, but when it goes into production, it would be changed. Yeah. Just because, again, inspired by true events. Like, wow, I know a little bit about you. You kind of seem like this. Okay,
right.
Well, and then that's all you get. Census records and, newspaper articles and, sometimes oral histories. Now, to your point, John W. White is a character in the show. Mm-hmm. And that, Ella, his daughter, maybe right. One of his kids, one of his other sons, this is 1900. And accounts of Black and African-American people are thin in the record, not just in Kalispell, but just in general. And I felt it was important to, find some good stories there, and his is one of them.
It is hard because and we'll come back to this in a second, in the Sanborn maps that we've been looking at recently, if a business or a building was owned by a Chinese immigrant, that's all it would say is Chinese, no. So yeah, getting beyond, the skin color and the race was sometimes, a real problem, is looking at historic documents like that. But I'm going to take a quick aside. So, because you tease something, and I want to kind of delve into it a little bit more for our viewers that might not know, all around the country. So, Brit, Charles Conrad, he passed away right after 1900, very soon afterwards.
1902.
1902. So, was it kind of leaving a leadership vacuum then, kind of in town?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say yes and no. I'd say symbolically, and again, Seth, if you've learned something different, go ahead and chime in. I don't want to be disloyal to the Conrads. I owe a lot to them. I hold a special place in my heart for them. But Charles Conrad, the more you kind of read about him, I feel like he was a silent partner in a lot of businesses. I think he was a financial backer. But, when you look at the newspaper article when he died in November of 1902, I don't even remember if it was front page. It was newsworthy. People cared, but I don't think that the town felt this giant crater effect. I think that he symbolically was a man who helped build the town. I think he had a lot of respect. His son is a little different in that in that regard. I know that even people today get father and son mixed up, and that kind of maybe left a shadow on some of Charles Conrad's reputation. But I don't think a huge leadership role had been lost at his passing. I think it was just sad, and it was more symbolic than anything. But again, Seth, I don't know, what have you found out in your research?
If anybody was really, I want to say, in charge of the town, it was Letty and her brother. They, between being the first constable and her being the full-time person. I mean, Charles just wasn't there as much as all of that. It was certainly his money and his associations with, J.J. Hill, and, I think he owned a lot of property and benefit. But was he involved for the day-to-day workings of the town? I think he really, I don't want to say it was beneath him, but he kind of had a lot of other business interests. And, by 1900, 1901, he was not a well man either. And so it was kind of like, and I think he was happy to let Letty and even the possibility of his son grow into a role where they were, the people running the town. I think it was just not, yeah, he was definitely a monarch in that sense, head of state, but like, I don't care where you put the street lights.
Yeah.
And I would agree with Seth that Letty really was the person making the decisions. She was, I think, more of a leader in that role than Charles Conrad was. And a large part was Charles Conrad wasn't here that often. He lived in this house for 7 years, but he was away on business throughout the whole country for a huge chunk of that time. Letty took over almost everything. And then when he was here, he was very sick. So, it's kind of just a mix of, I think his priorities were elsewhere. And I think he just wasn't physically able to be, a town leader in that sense. But I do think, again, symbolically, he was a strong leader. He helped create the town we know today. But it'd be interesting to hear a contemporary viewpoint on his death.
Well, I mean, and again, I think he was really kind of happy to get to let. I mean, of course, you're talking about a time that, women were, didn't have the right to vote. Even as a woman who was married and fulfilling all of these Victorian ideals as she still was kind of like, disenfranchised by the law and by certain societal constraints. So I think it seemed to me like there's an element about, and again, now this is my writer, point of view coming in, that Charles was happy, in my view, to sort of let Kalispell be influenced by Letty. I mean, in Victorian sensibility, it was the woman of the household who directed the morality, the culture. What are we reading? What are we talking about? Are we going to church? Make sure to, scrub behind your ears. I mean, so, if you look at the town as a baby or it's something to be nurtured, I think it was, if not officially, unofficially left in Letty's hands. Now, I really want to get a hold of there's some records. We were talking about this a couple days ago, and I've heard it from some other folks. The original, the courthouse wasn't finished until like 1905 or 06.
Right.
So there's all of these courthouse records and things that are like on Main Street, and they haven't made it to their way to the museum.
Right.
Do I have this right? I don't want to.
Yeah, right. So right now the city has them, but they will be eventually bound for the museum. Now there's some that I know of that are in the police station basement as well. The ones that I'm referring to are more bills of sale and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure how much, actual good documentation. But of course, if you dig far enough, even a receipt from McDonald's tells you something about somebody's life.
It sort of does. My point, what I was driving at though, is like, who's running the town? Obviously, right. There's, the mayor and the city council and stuff like that. But they were very responsive to, honestly, the business leaders and the upper middle class and people like Charles Conrad. And so there's a lot more exploration to be done. But I think one of the keys to how I'm creating a show, and so the Conrad drama, what we have right here, and even all of the research that goes around it and fills it out, tells a piece of the story. It doesn't tell the town story, right? So the part that I got into that is going into the progressive era was coming to understand the red light district. the Tenderloin, this whole area between, I don't know, 4th Street, 5th Street. You want to go from 1st Avenue West all the way to, where now the mall is. Mm-hmm. 2nd Street, 3rd Street. Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of it's a quarter of the whole downtown historic district. In fact, if you look at a book that shows the downtown historic district, it should be an oval, but actually it's shaped like a B because the whole Tenderloin has been erased. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting tale about why it was there, what it really was, who lived there, what their objectives were. And that is a big part of the story I'm telling, because between 1900 and 1904, which is the years I'm covering for what I'm doing, but it just so happens, and that was chosen because of Conrad timelines, that was one of the most interesting times in Kalispell history. At that time, in 1900, now you have to remember, it was the midpoint for the Great Northern Railroad,
right?
And it was
that was the only time it was. As soon as you're right.
It was wide open for gambling. It was wide open for women. It was wide open. It was considered the #1 town in Montana for gambling. Mm-hmm. So you had faro and one-armed bandits, and just like the whole sort of Western experience was actually happening at that time.
And what a change from the Conrad family and their big house on the historic East Side, and then you cross Main Street, and where are you? You're at the arcade, and you're surrounded by bars and gambling establishments. And that's still, to a point, a very, very smaller point, that's still kind of a reputation a little bit about Kalispell today, is that the West Side is for the working class, and then the East Side is the people with the old money families.
Well, there's some real nice houses on the East Side. There's some real nice houses in the West Side too. Actually.
There are. Oh yeah.
There's cute houses all over town, but historically,
right.
But the interesting thing is that the Tenderloin, which encompassed not just this lowest common denominator. I mean, it wasn't just like these sad ruffians and streetwalkers. I mean, it encompassed. It was a big tax base that actually, I mean, Chinese people and like prostitutes kind of built Kalispell. I mean, just the money that came in from gambling and from the red light district. And then also there was the theater. And so some of the characters that I'm focusing on and some of the research that I've uncovered is about like the arcade, the variety theater, the Stockholm Concert Hall, the Circle Saloon and Dance Hall. These are like a network of sort of fun places that you could go to on the West Side that really ranged from sort of can girl, legitimate almost vaudeville, including, magician acts and acrobats and like, just weird animal acts and stuff. That would have been more like at the Stockholm. And then the Stockholm was right next to the Conrad block. So that's 2nd Street and like between Main and 1st Avenue West.
Right.
And then if you go right over to 2nd Street between 2nd and 1st, 1st Avenue East, 1st Avenue West between 2nd and 1st Street, that would be where the arcade complex was. And that I sort of discovered this particular long forgotten Kalispell founding father who was, I think, a song and dance man. He might have been a vaudevillian. I'm still going into that, but he's from New York. He was definitely a big time gambler, a bartender, a saloon keeper, and a sharpshooter. That was, on this and that side of the law, just on this and that side of respectability.
This guy should be the protagonist. Forget about
He's one of- I mean,
forget
he's one
about
of
this Conrad guy.
Hey now.
Well, listen, he's one of them. That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's such a wonderful series because it's bursting with all of these really interesting people. They're going to fight for screen time, and that's the kind of show you want to watch.
Yeah,
you know?
sometimes literally fight for screen time, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, so the picture that you sent me the other day, that's what you, and maybe you'll post that or make a link to that.
Right.
That shows
I will.
a little piece of what this property once was in the 1920s as it's on the decline. But it was considered, okay, so the Arcade Variety Theater and Dance Hall was considered the finest resort in all of Montana for gambling and the sporting class at around 1900. And it would have included a boarding house. There was a chocolate shop, a cigar factory, a millinery, a jewelry store, and they were all kind of connected. There's a photo in this book that we all have come to know and love that shows a piece of it.
So that is the Henry Elwood book, and I will also provide a link to the digital version of that book put out by the Montana Memory Project.
Well, you know the picture that I'm talking about? It's the parade picture. That shows a piece of it. So, and that was where one of the coolest theaters in town was, where there were box stalls along each side of the stage that you could go into and close a curtain, and gals called box rustlers would come around, and there's some dispute, were they entertainers, were they ladies of the evening, were they both? You know, it's hard to say. There's lots of arguments to be made, but these gals often were actresses that sang and danced on stage and then were compelled through their job description to step off stage and sell high-priced drinks. You know,
Seth, you know what that sounds like? Hey, that sounds like another piece of great Northwest Montana history back in the earlier days of Glacier National Park. In Lake McDonald Lodge and Many Glacier Hotel, where they actually had college students from theater programs work there as waitresses, as bellhops, as front desk people. But in addition to doing those regular day jobs, they would spend their days singing and playing accordion and dancing for the guests. You know, it was a whole much like this arcade. You know, it was a do everything. You know, it was an entertainment and a place of business as well. You know, it was kind of your one-stop, you know, place of food and drink and entertainment and everything.
That's what it was meant to be. I mean, this you know, so this predates you know, some things that are you know, this predates malls. You know, an arcade in 1900 was kind of an enclosed shopping experience. And this was an attempt to have a bit of that, but it was really focused on, you know, it was a real masculine, frankly, endeavor because it was focused on gambling and saloons and drinking and, you know, the women, the dancers, the entertainers. I'm sure they had agency. I mean, there were some tough ladies that managed to work in the demi-monde class, and some of them made lots of money. Some of them got out of the demi-monde and went on to, you know, become married and become ranchers and stuff like that. It's a very, very fluid, strange time. There are folks, you know, Jerry Phillips, one of the frontier pioneers that I'm studying, that ran the arcade.
Right.
So he's definitely someone that shows up in the show. As you get deeper into the red light district, if you take, if you go down 2nd Avenue West and cross between 3rd, I think, and 4th Street, that was the baddest area in town. That was the baddest area in town. And if you lived on that street, you were basically a criminal. That was the one street, even back then, that was notorious.
I think that's where the Adventure Church is now.
I was going to say that's where I used to live.
Actually, yes, there is. Well, I think what's the famous drugstore?
Sykes.
Yeah, that's like on one side of the street, and then there's
Okay.
a church on the other side of the street. So that block, that
Yes.
was like a bad honky-tonk kind of place. And another early Kalispell character, Josh Harris. This dude ran the Circle Dance Hall and Saloon, which was also a brothel. And I've seen pictures of his brother and his mother. And from what I can extrapolate, he was real swarthy, tall, dark, handsome, and sort of mean looking. Like he had a resting mean face, you know. And he was, everyone was afraid of him. He was considered to be the king of the West Side, okay? Yeah. And he, among other things, besides being a pimp and a bartender, had a bear in a cage in the backyard. And it actually, if you look at that map, if you go to this area, it's a bear cage. What in the hell is that? For bear baiting. This was a thing that was part of entertainment at the time. You could go to the Circle Bar and Dance Hall who had a female piano player, which was like, whoa, wow, you know, women can play pianos in public. Go in the back and they would have dogs, you know, chasing the bear around, and it was kind of a blood sport. But so yeah, that was Josh Harris, and he was considered to be, you know, the king of the West Side. There's you've probably heard the story from this period about policemen who go into a saloon and get, you know, forgive me, bitch slapped by somebody and sent out. That's him. This is the dude that did that.
Interesting.
That's where this comes from. And another thing he did was lure I don't have the name of said person because it doesn't say so in the paper. It was a blind item that he lured a society lady into degradation and sex, you know, because her husband was on a business trip and it made the papers. And so, you know, this is who we're, you know, this is another person we're dealing with who by 1903 is literally run out of town. If you go to the city directory, it says removed to Spokane.
So, and everything you're telling me, Seth, and you're doing such a good job. It sounds like storylines throughout a season of a show. You know,
well, so that's the job, is to, how does this all interweave and relate? Right. And I can tell you that, you know, it's a small town. I mean, you live there. I mean, it's not like, even without a car, even without infrastructure, even considering everything, that, you know, with 5,000 at the time, or, you know, 10,000 residents would have made it like a second-class city or something like that.
And here we gained 5,000 residents in the last like 4 months. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry about that.
Nah, hey, everyone's welcome here. Like you've been saying, we've got such a story to tell here. It's no wonder why everyone, you know, wants to be here. It's and people did back in 1905 or 1900, and they still do. You know, it was a destination back when, you know, the Conrad family got here. It was a destination when I moved here full time 4 years ago. So. Oh yeah, no,
Kalispell is cool. It really is. I mean, it has great history, cool people, it's kind of laid back, and, you know, it's not as uppity as Whitefish. Oh, did I say that? Oh, no.
Oh, now I got to go back and blurt that one out, Seth.
No. The reason I say that right here, because at the time,
we like our Whitefish supporters as well.
No. You know what it is in the show. Yes. Okay. Before the midpoint gets moved, that actually becomes a thing where, like, somebody in the show, I'll give a little bit of the plot away, knows about this Marias Pass, and other characters don't. And so there's kind of an inside joke in the show where they're like, why are they coming to Whitefish? There's nothing there. It's just a bunch of trees. And of course, then, you know, they lose the railroad.
And then those trees became stumps, and then here we are.
Stump down. See, there's a method to it all.
Yeah.
But I'll say, you know, the Conrads are still the anchor for the story, and the house is as much a character as anything else. And it's really fun to follow the Conrads because there's a lot known about them. Now, I don't know what they thought in some cases, but there's letters written in the show. I think we're going to flash back a bunch to Fort Benton. So we'll see some steamboat action, you know, a little bit about how they met.
I hope you've got a guy who really knows how to build really good elaborate period sets.
Well, you know, you know, you go with green screens and practical stuff, but now, Brit, you went to Fort Benton this summer, I understand.
Yep.
And you told me a little bit about that. I'm like, how much of it is left? How does it look like what you might imagine? Is it in good condition as far as?
Yeah, I mean, the town itself is really cute. It's when we were there, we looked it up and we're like, what is the industry here? And a lot of them commute to Great Falls. They don't have a whole lot of business. It's very touristy. They have like 3 museums. But what is really cool is that the Missouri River does cut through the town, or, you know, on the outskirts of it. And you do have a very good sense of what it looked like back in the 1870s, 1860s. They still have their old fort up. I think they have pieces of the fort from the mid 19th century. So, yeah, it's kind of like Whitefish in a way, where you do have the modern view, but if you look, you can really see its kind of historic integrity, and you can kind of see maybe what Charles Conrad saw when he first moved there. So, if you haven't been to Fort Benton, I highly recommend it. It's a very cool little old town. You do feel like you've just stepped right back in time.
There are certain places that for some reason or another, and I can't really put my finger on it, and that might be part of the magic, that do just instantly transport you, and you feel like you are at that place and time and participating in that world. And the Conrad Mansion, to their credit, has done a really good job of kind of bringing people into.
Oh my God. Well, again, I think if you know, honestly, if the mansion didn't exist as a museum and it wasn't available to us in the way that it is, I don't know that I would be able to tell this story, because it really is the Conrad Mansion and the chronicling of these folks that has allowed sort of one's imagination to explode in color over black and white in other areas, because it's so wonderfully preserved right there. You know, I mean, like I have a Sears catalog from 1898 or something like that. And like, I can sit there and look through it, and like, you know, it's part of my research. And, you know, and I'm kind of think about the mansion and be like, oh yeah, they'd have one of those. Mm-hmm. You know, and it makes it seem more real and visceral. You know, you'd asked, you know, some of our email discussion about process, and you know, in writing, and to get around, inside, underneath, next to, you know, the Conrads, outside of just reading an account. I mean, it's just a huge amount. Now, for me, it was a passion project, but learning about Sino-Japanese War, learning about, you know, riverboats, and I mean, learning about, you know, how the Blackfeet Confederation is really structured, you know, and like there's so many avenues of interest that I've had to go down, at least I feel, to be a credible writer on a project like this, to have an understanding of the world, you know, that these folks lived in. So, you know, like I went hog wild. You know, I just got lots and lots of books. I'll just show you some of them right here. You know, and you know, and some good process books that I recommend. I mean, I don't make any money. I don't own these books, but you know, I mean, you know, stuff about that really speak to you know, this subject matter. You know, and here's the you know, trying to understand how these people lived, and you know, you know, what was going on in their minds and stuff like that. You know, I really, again, the mansion is so tactile. I also got like right around 1900, the Brownie box camera.
Oh yeah,
became a thing.
Kodak.
So I got one. I mean, I haven't done anything with it, but like I see a plot point, like a newsboy, with a camera running around. No one knows he's taking pictures. Wackiness.
And when, like, from a museum perspective, it's artifacts and documents like that Sears Roebuck catalog and like that Kodak camera that have to make you, as you're watching this thing, stop being the observer, stop being the viewer, and start participating within your mind. You have to ask yourself how and why and where and when. Like, how did all these things contribute to make this place a real possibility? It actually existed. And it's sometimes it's hard for us to actually get transported back to something like that when we're viewing on a screen. But certainly that's why I value the work that we do here at the museum and Brit's work at the mansion as well. It's a heck of a lot easier to do that when you are, actually physically surrounded and you can touch the thing in your hand, or you can see its curves and the light coming off of it or anything like that. It just creates such an immersive experience and really helps education and really just putting the whole thing together, the whole experience.
Yeah, I'd have to. Oh, well, I was just going to say, just even being here right now, low light fixtures that you're hitting your head on, walls that you stub your toe on. I mean, you have to imagine the Conrads were doing the exact same thing.
Right.
They were cursing parts of the house as much as they love it, the same way we do today. And it's just seeing them as humans. They were people that lived and breathed, and their time on this earth has ended. But now they're just a memory, and it's just. That's why I think museums are so important. You are able to just step back and just see them as people, as people who woke up one morning and just lived their life. So yeah, I think it's all really important.
And that's part of the reason why, Seth, that I bring this up is because it's very impressive from my standpoint. The actual tracks you're making to bring that into a television show, that kind of immersive experience with the authenticity and the real people, and then the catalogs and the actual things that they might have used.
Well, again, it's a passion project, so it's not like it's like hard work, but it isn't.
Yeah.
On one level, but also, I mean, I think that today's audiences are pretty sophisticated, and you can choose this app or that network, or I mean, there's a lot to fight for people's attention, and it would seem to me that a show like this, if it wasn't super well researched, it would be mediocre at best and risible at worst.
Yeah.
So now again, there's some roadblocks that happen when you want to be authentic. Like I would say this, like when you talk, there's a certain chronology that happens, like with the Conrads, for instance. There are certain things that happen. He died, this one got married to that one, the son spent all the money. I mean, I'm making brash generalizations here, but so there's a certain narrative that even say like on the tour, you guys do. That, I would, as a filmmaker, as a writer, there's no reason to deviate from any of that. All of that gets told. I guess where you get into trouble with people is, you can't get inside someone's mind. And when you start writing dialogue and you start getting involved in things like intention and motivation and, what was, that really does become a creative leap. And, if you're writing in the voice of a character and you, as an artist, as a writer, make a certain decision about them, it may not ring true for everybody. Someone will be like, I don't like the way he showed her like that. She wasn't like that, Yeah. And when you're dealing with inspired by real life stuff, that does happen. But as Brit pointed out, I mean, these were real people, and and I would say this, I am an actor. I'm a trained actor, and the point of view of, I think, good actor is like, wow, what I'm presenting to you is a human being. I have to respect the person on the page. This is like a real experience that I'm trying to give you. And so, that I'm never far from that when I look at all these things. But, how you create drama, is kind of by needling the emotion,
Right.
And you can't take any prisoners, it's drama. So, that it's helpful in this instance that I'm using some fictitious characters, i.e. there's some composite characters that will exist within the realm, like John W. White, the speaker series,
Right.
who I've done a lot of research into who he really was and what happened to him and why was he there and what happened to his children and blah, blah, blah. And I found out some cool things. And the bottom line is short of a relative handing me a diary, there's a brick wall there. So, decisions get made about how to present a person who's revered and has a real obituary and a life story that goes from here to here. And what you do dramatically is give him like a cousin that shows up from Helena.
Yeah.
That's whoever you want them to be. Titanic, James Cameron's Titanic, goes way too far in my opinion in this instance in melding fictitious characters with real characters on real events.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I'm living much further in a literal realm so far.
Well, it sounds like some of the characters that you described barely need to be enhanced or changed at all, that they can have a standalone movie or a series of movies all about these people. But well, I'm probably just going to wrap it up real quick here. Thank you both for joining us today. Seth, one more question, and then if you can't answer, let me know, because we talked a lot about the content. As far as the general feel of this project, are you thinking it's more of a Downton Abbey kind of feel or more of a Deadwood kind of feel?
That's an excellent question. And, if
it is yet to be determined,
if this
just
were
let
a
me know.
TV show, okay, if this were a TV show and I was making a pitch, I would say, this show, it's like Deadwood plus Downton Abbey. Like that actually, like that in the broadest stroke kind of, makes a point. And yes, so, it's very interesting that Kalispell and the Flathead Valley was settled late in the whole game, right? So that, the whole lore from the boosters of the time was that by 1890, the Wild West is settled, y'all. It's done. We killed all the buffalo. The Indian are where we told them to be. Come on out here. Let's build a town. Yep. That was already a thing. And yet, the late settlement of the valley, the Demersville kind of being grafted onto Kalispell, and the depression that happened in 1893, the war in 1898, it created a very strange, like kind of altered universe where the 19th and 20th centuries were really like going like this in Kalispell in 1900. The original culture war,
Right, a town that from kind of in the, very much in the past, like you said, settled late, but all of a sudden now trying to catch up to all of the movement all around it.
Yeah, and I think, and then, where the Conrads fit into all of this, they lived there. I've had a number of conversations with Chris Fick, who is the grandson to Alicia, and I love Chris. He's a great guy, and he's been very generous in talking to me about, what he remembers and, about his grandmother and his impressions of the family. And one of the things that he said to me that struck me was, they're a lot more interesting than what you'd think. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, they were real people, and, they are historical figures, and we kind of sand them down and put them in a box and say, this is who they are. But, they were real people. So there's going to be, aspects to them that are fascinating but not understood, or things that are incongruent to what you want to think. And he just sort of, and that's it. Look, for anybody who's working in the dramatic arts, that's an important notion to understand, that no villain is completely bad. No, ingenue is completely good. Everybody's got shades of gray, and that includes the Conrads. Although, in the one thing I would say is that they really are very idyllic, as far as, you research them one way or the other. They were generally very nice people. Charles, and they were a good family.
Yeah.
They actually stand the test of time when you look back at their writings and their points of view. I'm talking about Charles and Alicia. They were pretty cool people.
Well, for more great Conrad history, come on out to the Conrad Mansion here in Kalispell, or you can pick up copy of Half Interest in a Silver Dollar, or why not and do both of them. But thank you both for joining us today, and this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm always happy to learn more about the place I live and the people that kind of built it. So thank you both for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in today to our John White Speaker Series. If you enjoyed today's speaker or our conversation today, I do have 3 more for the 2021 calendar year, the 19th annual John White Series. And we hope to be back next year in the winter of 2022 as well. So if you haven't already seen the other ones, check them out on our website, nwmthistory.org, or you can always stop by. We are open currently from Monday through Thursday, 10 to 5. Thank you all very much. Have a great day wherever you are.